So today's presentation is all about identifying your skills. I really think this is foundational to job search. And the reason for that is that's what employers are looking for. They're looking for skill sets. They may ask you where you've developed those skill sets through dates of employment and through employers, but really what they're looking for is what can you transfer from your previous experience to my needs. And that's why it's extremely important to do a real nice long look at what you have to offer employers outside of just dates and locations. So identifying your skills is going to help you in all aspects of job search and in networking, because networking is, of course, a huge part of job search. So at the end of the day, we're hoping that you have an understanding of the importance of knowing your skills. You'll have some ideas about how to define what we call transferable skills, and you're going to know how to identify the needs of employers and how to connect your transferable skills to their current needs. So I'm going to be doing some questions. Some of them will be rhetorical. I'm just going to give you the answer. Some I'll ask you to put into the chat box. It's just a way of getting information out there. So the first question I have, and that I'm going to give you the answer for, the definition is, what is a skill? It's really important that we define that before we move forward. And a skill, as we define it in job search, is anything you can do or do well. Okay, so this is not like breathing. This is not maybe necessarily everything you can do, but think of it as, could this potentially be a benefit to an employer? And don't think of it as what my former employer needed of me or required of me. That's too narrow a focus. When you are looking for work, in many cases, you're looking to establish yourself in a new industry, or at least with a new employer who may have different needs or different expectations. So it's a really good idea to do a real broad look at what you do and what you do well, and hopefully what you like to do. And to kind of help you with that, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to put it into the chat box, just your answer. And there's no wrong answers to this, by the way. How many skills do you think the average person has? The average person, not some, 40 years of experience, doctorate, and whatever. How many do you think the average person has? We always get a real wide variety of answers to this. I see anywhere from 5 to 15 to 40 to 50. Someone went as high as 500, someone went to 150. You may look at that and, if this is the first time you've considered this, very natural to say 5 or 10. The reason for that is most of us define skills too broadly. We need to get really narrow in this when we get down to what the actual skill set is. So I'll give you an example. I'm doing something today I would call presenting, or you might call it facilitating, or training or teaching. There's a lot of different ways you could define what I'm doing, but for a lot of people, they would say, you're talking to people in a workshop so that you're training somebody. Okay, training is there's a lot of different definitions for training. I've always marketed myself as a trainer, and I've had people call me on the phone, people I knew well, and ask me for help in losing weight. And I didn't understand that. In fact, this only happened once, but it was kind of funny. Someone I knew for many years called me and said, Art, I need some help. I said, great, what can I do for you? He said, I need to lose some weight. And I'm a computer trainer by trade, and I thought, well, do you want me to create an Excel spreadsheet to help you track your calories, or what exactly? He says, no, you're a trainer, aren't you? He thought I was an aerobics trainer or something else. I hadn't defined narrowly enough what I had to offer my network. Therefore, they're not an effective network for me because they don't know what I can offer employers that they may have connections to. So I should say I'm a public speaker. I'm an educator. I work with technology. I create PowerPoints. I troubleshoot technical issues. There's a lot of skills involved in specific types of training. Another example I always give is welding. If you say you're a welder, there's probably 100 skill sets very easily defined within the welding trade. There's MIG, there's TIG, there's cast iron, there's settling torches, there's plasma cutters, there's all sorts of different things and all different levels of experience. So we really need to, at least in our own mind, come to an agreement on what we have to offer. So what we find very quickly is we have a lot more skills than we think. And that leads to the average person being able to identify between 500 and 800 skill sets. And that may seem wildly outlandish to you right now, but if you take a piece of paper and start writing down the things you've done in the past and how you could break them down, it expands very quickly. If you're a computer person, think of how many programs you can work with. Think of how many different, if you're a sewer, how many different things you can sew or different types of stitching. And, there's all sorts of different ways to look at this. Every industry has a lot of variability in not only the skill sets each individual brings, but the level to which they bring them. So you can even rate your skills. There's a lot out there. And I just want you to kind of look at what you have to offer an employer through a larger lens. The reason this is important is most people can identify 10. Think of it, you have between 500 and 800, and of course not all of those skills are relevant to any one employer, but far more than 10 are. I guarantee you far more than 10 are, but most people can identify 10. And the reason is they say things like, I'm a welder, I'm an HR representative, I'm a manager, where the skill sets that encompass that job title are much more expansive. And that's what employers are looking for, is those component skill sets in many cases. The reason this is so important to us in job search is that when you're working for somebody, it's very easy for you to demonstrate your skills. And they're going to make their own assumptions on the value that bring. And they'll even probably notice some things you do well that you're not even aware of. Maybe you're really good at de-escalating angry customers. You may have never thought about that. But if someone sees you do it, witnesses it, they can identify that as a skill set you have. In job search, they can't. In most cases, they don't have any idea of what you bring to the table. So we need to define it for them in terms they understand, filling needs that they have identified through their job posting. And the people who are successful in doing that are not necessarily the best candidates. They're just the best marketed job seeker. Okay, I've been in situations where I assumed I was the best candidate for a job. I thought, boy, it'd be really hard for someone to bring as much experience to this position as I have. I don't have any control over that, but I do know my worth. And I thought I was the number one candidate, hands down. And I didn't get the job. And I was sad. Okay, I'll admit that. But I was really perplexed because I thought, how could someone else have more experience than I did in this field? Didn't matter the experience I had, it's how I marketed that experience. And someone competed at a higher level during this very important phase, which is the interview phase and the application and all that sort of thing. That's where you talk about your skills to someone who doesn't know your skills. And what we find is the percentage of people who cannot identify, sell, or prove their skills during an interview sits at about 80%. And the way that works is a lot of employers will interview up to 5 candidates. If I interview 5 candidates and only choose one, that means there's a 20% success rate for any, the possibility of one person getting that job. You got a 20% chance. The failure rate's 80%. And it's not because the other 4 candidates couldn't do the job. It's because they hadn't identified the needs of that employer and connected them to their skill sets, because that's what interviewing is all about. In some cases, you're able to do a work sample interview, but even then, that's only part of the process in which you'd be able to demonstrate a skill. In most cases, it's answering questions about their needs and how you can fill those needs. So how do we develop skills? Well, in any multiple choice question, it's usually all the above if they give you that answer, but there is kind of a hierarchy here. The number one way that we develop skills that employers will buy into is through work experience. That doesn't mean that's the only pool of knowledge you need to draw from, but it's the most important. That's why they ask for your work history, because not only do they want you to talk about a skill, but they want proof of where you developed it. So work experience is the #1 most trusted place that employers will look at your skills through. But if you're switching careers, or if you're just starting out, sometimes it's other places where you're gonna market your skills from. So education, especially if you are if you just graduated, that becomes much more important. For some people, it's volunteer work or socializing with people, hobbies, sports. So really, we develop skills through a wide variety of methods, but highlight and make it stand out the work experience if you do have that, because that's why employers really, the chronological resume is so important, because employers can look at your most current job, and if they can assume there's some transferability between the duties of that job and the duties they would have you doing, they're going to buy into those skill sets a lot more readily. All right. So this is interesting. The first time I heard the answer to this question, I was cautious. I didn't really believe it. But at least at interview, this is 100% true. The types of skills that are most important to employers are soft skills, people skills. Will you fit in? Will you adapt? Will you learn? Most employers are going to have to train you into the position to some degree. Of course, we didn't waste a ton of time going to school not to learn something. We've learned and bring abilities into any work situation, but they're going to have to give you training on how they do it, their process, okay? So what they're really looking for at interview is it worth my effort and my money to train you into the position I am posting this for? So at interview, everyone's qualified. At least they should be. If I'm an employer that has maybe 50 applicants, I've filtered that down to the 5 most qualified on paper applicants. So when you get to interview, think about, I am competing against 4 other, or whatever the number should be, equally qualified, at least to my knowledge, applicants. What else do I bring to the table? Then you start focusing on a lot of these, what we call behavioral-based questions that really get to the soft skills about how you handle conflict, how you troubleshoot, how you deal with people who are maybe hard to get along with. A lot of them deal with conflict, but there are other kind of pools of questions that they'll ask that are really trying to get to, how do you handle situations? How do you handle adversity? How do you handle conflict? How do you handle problem solving? And then one of the big ones, and this is kind of my secret weapon in any interview, is how will you adapt or learn? Because change is constant and ever increasing in today's workplace. If you can give an example of how you've adapted to a new situation, they'll understand that that's a skill set you bring to this job. And when they institute a new program, a new software, a new way of doing things, if you have let them know that you can adapt quite easily, or at least have done it successfully in the past, that's a really big thing for them to take away from their interview with you. So certainly we're going to talk about our hard skills, and we're going to talk about what we do well, but a lot of the interview, at least 50%, you'll find deals with soft skills. And that's the harder thing to quantify. It's the harder thing to demonstrate. So identifying your skills is going to help you in your job search through a variety of ways. The first thing it's going to do is help you to prove your abilities to potential employers, because not only are we going to identify a skill, in promoting it, we're going to have to talk about examples. If it's grant writing, say it's grant writing, that's a skill set you have. Well, talk about how you successfully been funded and met the objectives of a grant. If it's computer skills, don't just say I'm really good at Excel. Talk about a spreadsheet you've created and the impact it had on your organization and how other people adapted or adopted that process to make their work easier. Always show the benefits of a skill set to the organization, to the clients you served, to the coworkers you supported, because that's the end results. That's the positive results of a skill set you possess. Of course, skills are going to let you write your resume a lot more effectively. I've seen resumes that are just dates of employment. That's the easy part. Not always easy, but that's the easier part. The hard part is to say what you did during your time at that employer. And for every job you apply for, it may be slightly different what you market about your time at that employer. I mean, you think about it. If you worked at an employer for 10 years, you probably did a whole bunch of stuff. You pick out the most transferable skills you developed and the best stories from that previous 10 years as it relates to the needs of the current employer. And how you do that is you just look at their job posting. What are they asking for? We have a lot more information than we used to have. If you ever looked in the paper in the past, I mean, that's how long I've been doing this. We used to, have the paper delivered to my location every day. And I had clients that I was working in job search with, and they would look through the want ads. And they would look at a very, very small job posting, and they would determine how they could market themselves to that employer. Because they didn't have a lot of information to go with, usually they just use the same resume over and over again. Today's job postings are huge. There are several pages. And because of that, because they're giving us all this information about what is required for their particular need, it's our responsibility to respond to that. So they're giving us probably even more information than we want. So we pick and choose the most important points, the required skill sets, and then we make the connection between our skill sets or our abilities or our past work history. And that also helps to sell your qualifications in an interview. And we talked about that a little bit already. All right, take a quick look at the chat just to make sure. I think we're on top of everything. Yes, exactly. There was a good question. There's a big difference between saying I can identify 500 skills and then being concise on how you identify those skills to satisfy your needs. And yes, we will be getting to that. So there are 3 types of skills generally accepted in job search. Those are the soft skills, which we talked about, and those are what are used to get along with others and for self-management. And that could be something as simply as, being organized or being on time. Don't assume, by the way, that things that you think everyone should have, that everyone has. I'm sure many of you have been in work situations where a lot of coworkers show up late. People really like to sometimes vent about this. Just in the chat, have you ever been in a work situation where you felt that you're the only one who was on the clock, that was beholden to a start time? I've always felt that in my work, that it's when I get paid from 8 to 4:30, that's the time I show up. Yes, I see someone. Yeah, I always get some more energetic answers to this. That is a skill set, and don't think you can't promote that about yourself. You don't have to go on and on about it, but if you're talking about your skills, you can say, I've always thought it's extremely important to be on time, because our store is open from a certain time to a certain time. We are available to customers during that period, and if I'm not there, I can't provide that service. So you can be assured that I am a dependable worker who, unless there is a really good reason not to be there, I will show up. I have a great history of attendance and timeliness. It's something I very much pride myself on. Gosh, if you're an employer who has a hard time getting people to show up for work, and that's a huge issue right now, that's a selling point. That you might think that's baseline, but sometimes that information to tip the scales in your favor. Job-specific skills are really to an industry. Be careful about using the correct jargon or acronyms. Sometimes you can. If you're an HR professional, you can use things like PHR, SPHR, because they're going to know what that means within that industry. But if you're in resume development like I am, I'm not going to use generic ASCII resumes because that's an outdated term for a lot of people and they're not going to know what that means. So I'm going to say I'm able to develop plain text resumes that are easily accessible to online forms. Same term, more accessible because it's very specific, but I always have to look at my audience and what I can expect them to understand. When in doubt, with acronyms, put the acronym in and then spell out what that acronym means. If they put it in the job posting, it's fair game. You know, if they put in an acronym that they're requiring you to have OSHA compliance or HIPAA compliance or whatever, absolutely, you can 100% put that in. All right. So, and then there's transferable skills, and these are used in many different jobs. Soft skills are extremely transferable, but some job skills are transferable. Computer skills, think about that. How many jobs are there out there that don't require some computer skills? A lot of jobs have adopted computer skills over the years. My first job was to transfer an all-paper insurance agency to a digital age. Now, that was a job that didn't require computer skills at the beginning, but then started to require them. And now that's what they do all day, every day, is they rate insurance out of the computer. They used to do it out of a manual. So there's a lot of skills that are transferable. Okay, so let's take a look at the next. This is just a quote. My people have the confidence of their convictions and they know their skills. When you know your skills, you can overcome objections, you can add value, and you can create a need that they didn't even know existed. You really want to stick to what their stated needs are, but you also want to be able to reinforce some things during an interview that maybe you weren't prepared for. You know, if they say, oh, you know, one of the other things we've got going here is we're creating a new marketing campaign and we're looking at social media. Oh, that's awesome. I've done a couple of social media campaigns in my past position. We used Hootsuite to have a really consistent messaging put out through various online platforms. If you know those skills, if you have examples of those skills, even though you didn't intend to market them, you're ready to go should that opportunity arise. I'm going to pause right now. I see a lot of things coming through the chat. I haven't been able to look through them. Jason, is there anything we need to deal with right now before we move on?
Just a lot of really interesting observations so far from our guests today. It's very, very interesting, their experiences and bringing those to the question. Some of the questions will likely come up in the slide deck, Art. So, one of the questions was to summarize the best ways to present yourself without looking like you're being a little bit too braggadocious or something along those lines.
I love that term, braggadocious. So it's so seldom do you get to use that in everyday conversation. Yes, you're right. It's a fine line. But during job search, during an interview, if you do not advocate for yourself, if you do not promote yourself, someone else will. You do not want to come off as having no humility. You don't want to come off as a know-it-all, but you do have to be able to talk about things that you've done well. Most of us, myself included, don't like talking about our successes because it does sound like you're bragging. They're asking for it. Where have you been successful? You know, as long as you're honest about it, don't take credit for something you were just part of a team for. Don't lie. Just tell the truth, and you practice talking about it. In fact, one of the things I recommend you do, if you are willing, is do a mock interview and get some feedback. So there are 50 career force locations throughout the state of Minnesota. Many are available for mock interviews, either in person or online, just like we're doing right now through WebEx. We could do it through Teams. Some can do it through Zoom. Then I'll start with contacting a local career force location, and I'll be sending everyone the location finder. You can register for one-to-one appointments, and you know, tell you what, it's not easy. It's not fun to take part in a mock interview, but I will tell you, you will get a lot out of it. And I'd rather you practice those types of marketing strategies when there isn't a job on the line. You know, kind of get some feedback and hone your skills before they're needed. Okay. So a couple things before we get on here, I'm going to show you a website, and I'll put the link in here. Actually, the links will be in the follow-up material. So on careerforcemn.com, which is the website that you started your registration for this class with, there's an online tools section. And right within there, there are a whole bunch of different assessments you can take. There's an employment readiness assessment, there's an interest assessment, there's a skills assessment, and there's a compare skills assessment. And I'm just going to highlight this one, although I really recommend you take a look at all of them. What this would allow you to do is enter your experience. Like say you were a manager and your zip code, and it'll tell you available careers, in-demand careers in your area, in your field. And it'll also allow you to compare those to other areas. So let's say you were in printing. You know, printing is a declining industry just because of all the online stuff that's going out there. But marketing is marketing, and printing and online marketing would have a lot of transferable skills. So play around with this. There's a lot here. It'll tell you what kind of where to put your efforts. And of course, MinnesotaWorks.net will show you the available jobs that are in your area that's highly filterable. You can do keyword searches even by a skill set or an occupation title. So careerforcemn.com, it's the online tools option, and I'll send you the links to all of these. So as far as applications are another opportunity to sell your skills. So have the information ready before you start. Have the exact dates, the addresses, the phone numbers, the salary, if that's asked for. Be honest and positive in it. I'll be sending everyone a data record that can also be found on careerforcemn.com. Fill that out before you even fill out an application. That way you're filling out from clean copy. It's kind of like a sample application. Every application is a little bit different, but they ask for a lot of the same information. One thing I'm going to mention, I've had people ask me this. They say, well, why do I fill out an application and then spend all that time putting a lot of the same information on a resume? Well, an application is a filtering device created by and for the employer. It's what they want to know about you. Not everything they want to know about me is what I want to market about myself. For example, if I was let go from my last position, they're going to ask me that. Why did you leave your last position? I'm not going to talk about that on my resume because my resume is a marketing piece created by me containing the information I want them to know. So even though there's very similar information on both, it's from a different point of view. Also, applications and resumes are often seen by different entities. So the application might be seen by an applicant tracking software or an HR department or some personnel departments, we used to call them, that may be screening a large number of applicants, and then they may take those applicants and send the resumes on to the interview committee. I was very shocked when I was in the middle of a hiring process and found out that no one on the interviewing committee had ever seen my application. So the same information needs to be on both in many cases because they need to stand alone. You want to be positive and honest on your applications, and where you can trip yourself up there a little bit is when they ask why you left your last employer. So my number one, my recommendation is if you were terminated, if you were fired, if you were truly let go from a position, put involuntary separation on there. If it was something other than a termination, then you could explain it a little bit more. So if it was a permanent layoff, or if that position no longer exists with the company, then go into a little more detail. But never try to defend yourself in the application. That's never going to go well. There's not enough space or enough time. And it really is diminishing returns on that. You just need to explain the situation and why it's not an issue going forward. And that's hard. That's really hard, especially if you were, terminated and you truly feel that the employer was being, dishonest or they weren't treating you fairly. That's another great example of reaching out to career force representatives and tell us what happened. Talk about the whole thing and then come to an agreement with yourself about how you're going to talk about it. That tells the truth, but it doesn't hurt you. And we go into that even more in our interview classes. But on an application, let's keep it simple. If you were fired, involuntary separation. Applications can screen applicants out because people don't use the same keywords that are found on the job posting. Remember, applicants or applications can be pushed through an applicant tracking software, a computer program that looks for keywords. So use the same terms they use to describe your skills. So like I said, I could be a trainer, an educator, or a facilitator. If they list me as a facilitator and I see myself as a trainer, guess what? I am now a facilitator. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to embellish, but I will use their words to describe my skills within the context of those definitions. As long as I can truly say that I meet that definition, I can use different words to describe the same skills. It's a chance to use your skills wisely. So use the space wisely. If they give you the space, use the space. You don't have to write a book, but put some effort into it, because some employers weight the applications more heavily than the resume. So, assume that they're both on equal standing. So put effort into both. And then make sure to follow directions, especially if you are filling them in person. That still happens, by the way. If you're filling out an application in person, it's really handy to have that personal data sheet, so you're copying from spell-checked copy, and you have that information. You're not thinking up at the top of your head, you're just copying it down. But read the instructions there very thoroughly. Don't leave anything blank. On online applications, in most cases, they don't allow you to move forward unless you've filled in something. If it's not applicable, put an A, not applicable. All right, we're gonna do one more thing, and I see there's a lot of a lot of conversation going. Jason, after this next slide, we will pause for some more questions. So this is a fun little exercise I do, and it relates to the need to be to pay attention to detail, to proofread on both your resume and on your applications. Copy and paste from a Word document into your applications. In many cases, that's going to give you a better, you're going to be more assured that it's spell checked and the grammar is correct. So this is just a fun little exercise. This is an exercise, not a test. There's no tricks to it. So if you've seen this before, you don't have to participate. But if this is new to you, all I'm asking you to do is read through these 4 lines of text in the white here. Don't worry about, like I said, there's no tricks here. Just read through once or twice. Count the number of F's as in Frank that you see in these 4 lines of text. Like I said, no tricks. Just count the number of F's you see in this white area here and put it into the chat box if you're willing. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right, so let's take a look at the chat box. I've seen some 3s, lots of 3s, some 4s, some 5s, some 6s. As you're seeing this, I want you to pay attention to the variety of answers we have. And my assumption is, and I'm sure I'm right, we're all very intelligent people with a lot of skills. How could we possibly have different answers to a very simple question? And what this should point out to you is that it's very, very easy to miss things on your resume, in an application, in an email that you send out. This is as easy as it gets. You're looking at this hopefully for the first time. You're looking at it objectively. You have no preconceived notions of what it says or what's located there. Your resume is much harder because you already know what it should say. You already know exactly how it should be perceived. So you skim over things. Your brain says one thing that's maybe not even on the document. So for those of you who said 3, you saw finished, files, and scientific. And you're right, there are 3. For those of you who said 4, 5, and 6, you're also right, because there's the of, and the of. By the way, this is not an intelligence test. Don't worry. If you've got 3, you should just laugh it off. lot of different reasons why some people see 3 and some people see all. One of the interesting ones is people who speak English as a second language more likely will see 6 because they look at language, their second language differently. Um, yeah, I think it's fun. I saw this in the 90s, by the way. I saw this in the 90s on a late night news program, and I've remembered it ever since. I thought it was pretty cool. It's kind of fun little exercise. All right, by the way, I'll be sending this to everyone in the follow-up material. Try it on your friends, try it on your family. It's just a fun little exercise. Okay. So before we move on, Jason, any questions we need to get to? Looks like we got enough time to have a couple of questions.
A lot of the questions in the chat have circled around things you'll probably cover on your slide relating to separations and how to articulate separations that are either reductions in force, through layoff, through any number of different factors that can affect someone's employment relationship with their employer. So you may be considering that, but that's something that has definitely come up in our chat today.
Well, it's like I was knowing you were going to say that. That's the slide we have up right now. So the key is to use the best language possible. And by the best language possible, I mean what benefits you the most while telling the truth. So if you were let go through, not your choice, and I'm going to use 2 words, 2 very loaded words that bring up a lot of emotions, terminated or fired. We never use those words on an application because they bring up too much negativity. Now, the truth is you were potentially let go. A lot of people get let go. Good people get let go and fired, terminated from jobs every single day. But also some low performing, some embezzlement, some other things go on. You don't want to associate yourself with that side of being fired. So let's talk about in the best terms possible. So involuntary separation is the time-honored answer that we've given to this. Now, be aware though, when you say that, involuntary separation, they're going to want to know. They're eventually going to ask you for a longer explanation. So like I said, have that conversation one-on-one with a career force specialist and come to an understanding about how you're going to ask that. It should be fairly scripted, actually. It should give enough information so there's not follow-up, but not enough information that you veer off into the emotions of it, even though it's a very emotional thing. And I can tell you the impact this has. I was working with a client and who was perfectly okay with me sharing this story, who had lost 6 job opportunities because of the way he answered that question. They asked him why he left his last job, and he gave a very emotional response on how it made him feel that he was fired from a position. And he had been on 6 interviews, and he said every time we get to that part of the interview, it's going just great, and then I lose it, and I don't understand why. They asked me, and I told them. So I listened to his answer, and then we developed another answer that also gave that information, but it was not the emotional part of it, it was the facts of it and why it wasn't an issue going forward. The number one reason for being fired from most jobs is attendance. Can't do a job you don't show up for. There's a lot of reasons why people don't show up for work. They may have some personal matter they're dealing with, and that's quite often what it is. As long as that personal matter is not an issue going forward, you can tell an employer. For the last 6 years, I had worked in a sales position in which I was multiple times salesperson of the year. Unfortunately, in my last 6 months of employment, I did have a sick loved one who I had to spend a lot of time with. We did file for FMLA. Unfortunately, the needs of that situation exceeded what the employer was able to deal with, and they did end up letting me go. That is no longer an issue going forward, and I would carry in my excellent attendance prior to that situation forward into this new sales opportunity. And I bring over 25 years of directly related experience into this new opportunity. I'm very excited. That's an example of they fired me, but I had some really good experience beforehand. I bring some really good experience in to your needs. There was a momentary thing that happened that's no longer an issue going forward. It's enough information that answers the question. And I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with giving some personal information because it benefits me. It explains the situation and it moves forward. Yes, Jason.
Art, there's a particularly excellent question in the chat that I want to just bring to your attention. For people who are subject to layoff or separated, but aren't given a reason from HR or from a corporate entity that they're employed with, and how should they articulate something like that to a prospective employer?
Brings up a good situation, actually. Good question. First of all, ask. And I get you probably already asked, but many people who think they were fired weren't fired. They may feel like you're fired, and it might even be that they were just using fancy language to mask a firing. But if it was a downsize and if it was a layoff, and that's how they list it, and that's what it's like in your file, then you can, it certainly takes a lot of the pressure off you because you don't have to explain it. You can just say, due to a downturn in the economy, there were several layoffs. I was in the last round of that. Now, if you weren't given a reason, certainly call and ask, but be aware that it doesn't help the situation by bringing the emotion into it, even with the former employer, because they're probably going to get a call verifying dates of employment. And so even though that might be a bad relationship, try to do the best you can in those situations. Practice what you're going to say. That's such an individual question. I'd want to know what was said, how it was done. Was it through email? Did they, escort you out? Did they say that, we're going to be laying off employees? Use the words that they give you. If that's all you have to work with, use the words they give you. You can even express some, consternation when, it was a somewhat of a strange situation. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I'm assuming that it was, some kind of shakeup in the management cycle. I wasn't given a specific reason. However, I'm very happy to use all the skills I developed during that time into your situation. At least you're saying, being honest about it, but do the best you can. But again, in each individual situation, I would kind of spell it out for someone and go through that process to see if you can dig in a little bit more. If you resigned, don't say quit. Give a reason why you resigned if you can, because that raises a flag for me when someone is looking for work and they quit a job and didn't have a job ready. There's usually some story there, and sometimes it's that they were actually fired. Many people who are fired will say that they quit, or we're given that option. Employers will say either quit or I'll fire you. I get that's a whole nother discussion, but if you resigned because of an educational opportunity, because maybe you had to take care of a loved one and you wanted to, be respectful of your employer's time and money, or maybe you relocated, family relocation, give as much information as benefits you, but you have to explain that a little bit, because I'm going to wonder if I invest in you, if I train you, if I go through all the paperwork, are you someone who quits jobs occasionally? That's an issue that I want an answer to. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about portfolios here, and if we have any other questions hanging out at the end, we'll certainly get back to them. But I want to talk about portfolios because I think it's a very underutilized tool in job seeking. When you go to an interview, it's not a bad idea to have a folder of documents. You could have copies of your resume, copies of your cover letter, your reference sheet. They may not have asked for it yet. Letters of recommendation, they might not have an opportunity to even give that yet. Work samples, potentially. Copies of certifications or licensures. There's all sorts of things you can include in this, and it's not just for artists or visual types of work. It can be for anybody. If you did some marketing for a workshop that you put on, if you maybe did some things through a volunteer opportunity. I did some graphic design for a 10K race that I was the administrator for. That gives me all sorts of things where I can show the marketing for it. I can show how many people registered for it, how much money was raised. I can do all sorts of different things from even a volunteer opportunity, as long as it relates to the needs of the employer. It's an idea of proving something rather than saying something. A work sample should add value to what you're just expressing otherwise verbally. And the reason I'm such a big fan of this is it serves multiple purposes. One, don't assume they have copies of your resume when you go to the interview. I've been in multiple situations where they didn't, and it was really nice just to be able to hand them out. It's a nice takeaway. At the end of the presentation or end of the interview, you can say, you know, I put together a portfolio to assist you in your decision. It includes backup of everything I had mentioned during the interview and copies of my certifications and licensures. It's a great handoff. It shows you as a very professional, very organized person. If I hire you, I'm going to have to get some of that information anyway. And I tell you, when I got that from one of the applicants I was interviewing, it was the tipping point. It turned a pool of 5 equally qualified candidates into 4 other candidates and the one that stuck out, because this person showed me a lot by giving me that portfolio. It also gives you something to look at while you're in the waiting room. Most of us in a waiting room, if you go in any doctor's office, everyone's on their phones, okay? Don't be on your phone when they come to get you in the waiting room or in the reception room. Be looking through your portfolio. Maybe in there you have questions you want to ask, that sort of thing. Your portfolio should also be branded. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Branding is you might think of as terms like corporate branding, like logos. If I say the Golden Arches, everyone thinks McDonald's. If I say a swoosh, you're probably going to think Nike. They spend millions and millions, if not billions of dollars in marketing their brand. They want you to think of them when they think of a need. For branding yourself, there's a couple different levels in which we can brand ourselves. When we network, we can brand ourselves as what we see ourselves as. I see myself as a trainer, or I see myself as a job developer or a placement specialist. If you have a LinkedIn account, your LinkedIn account should reinforce that brand. What you're talking about and what you're promoting about yourself should be found online if you have that. If you're out there, you don't have to have a LinkedIn account, of course, but you don't want to have a split digital personality, meaning that I'm telling everyone I'm a bartender, but they go online and they see that I'm a computer guy. It should reinforce what you're trying to achieve in your job search. But as far as the documentation you put out, it's much more simple. It's how it looks. So let me show you a couple examples here. So if I were to put out a resume that looked like this, and just for the sake of argument, there's everything can be improved, but just I'm using this as an example. Let's say that this looks like a decent resume. It's well formatted, it's easily accessible. I can find the things I'm looking for. If you saw this as my resume and you saw this as my cover letter, are you going to assume my skills lie in the resume, in what you see in the resume, or what you see in the cover letter? Employers never assume the greater. They're always going to assume the lesser. They're going to assume that you got help with the resume, but this is the skill sets I'm actually receiving if I hire you. So meet their expectations at every level by branding the documentation you put out. And as far as what documentation, that could be your resume, your cover letter, your reference sheet. They should all look similar. They should all give the same impression. So look at the difference here from this cover letter to this cover letter. Do you see the curb appeal or the instant reaction? One looks like something you would see from a business. One looks like something that's an email you send to a buddy of yours. The difference here is just in the formatting, just in the branding. The content is exactly the same. The body of this is exactly the same as the body of this, but the initial impression is much different. All right, and again, what you would do is you just copy and paste your heading from one to another. You would use the same margins, the same font, make it look similar, have your whatever brand you want to put out there. All right, I did want to leave a few minutes here towards questions, and I saw that we had a bunch of them. So Jason?
Yeah. So
I'll let
there's
you kind of take over here.
there's three that are particularly salient, I think, today. The first is for workers who work in industries that are typically by contract. In other words, they're not, you know, can you just articulate that the contract was not renewed or the contract ended when you talk about the end dates of employment in the interview process? That would be one of the biggest ones. And is reduction in force still preferable, or is that still something that can be said when you're talking about involuntary separations from layoff?
Yeah. So contracting first, let's talk about that one. There's a lot of things to think about when you're contracting through the resume, through the cover letter, through how you network yourself, and also how you fill it out in the application. Um, if it was a contracted position that had an end date, that's easy. Reason for, reason you left that job, just put in contracted position, end of contract, or end of contracted position. That's perfectly fine. That's and seasonal work too. That's another one. A seasonal position, and people will understand that. There are some ones you don't have to go into a ton of information on. As far as reduction in workforce, layoff, I tend to give just a little bit more information on those types of things because individuals who just say laid off, in many cases, unfortunately, were terminated, but they couldn't deal with that. They was too emotional and they didn't want to put that out there, so they will say it was a layoff. So if you truly were laid off, put a little bit more information like um, divisional layoff alongside 25 coworkers, something like that, or permanent layoff due to site closure. So one of my positions that I had right before I started working with the state, that was a concern of mine. They closed my site. And in my worst times, I was thinking this was, could have been a firing. Someone could look at this as, well, it's just a way of saying you were fired. Well, it wasn't. It was the site was not bringing in enough revenue, and the board decided to close the site after a certain number of years. So it was just a permanent layoff due to site closure. And that gives enough information. Now, I'm probably going to have to give a little more information in the interview, but that's great because now I'm in the interview. Don't let anything you say on an application prevent you from telling them more in an interview. We can go on to another question.
Yep. Yes. For people who are in industries that specifically have online portfolios, if for instance, creative individuals, things like that, is there a best platform to showcase that? Would it be LinkedIn? Would it be something else? Do you have any advice on how to create something like that for those professionals?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different options out there. We used to years ago, the MINSCU, or the Minnesota State Universities, and they used to have something called eFolio. Um, that was bought out by a private concern, and we no longer promote that. But there are some free and some paid. Easiest answer is LinkedIn kind of acts as an online portfolio now. You can even put work samples. I do something called Prezi, which is an online presentation software. And I can put a link to that as an example of my skill sets right within my LinkedIn profile. That has more options for that than it has in the past. They've kind of pivoted to being more of, that's what LinkedIn is, by the way. It's a profile. It's not a resume. It's an online profile. If you want to get more in depth, maybe you have some videos that you want to show, some documents that you want to express. You can do that to a certain extent in LinkedIn. A very simple free one is Google Profile. That's if you have a Google account, there's a Google Profile that you can develop. Doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that a lot of people may want at that point for that. And then you can get to like Wix.com. That's more of a paid subscription. Even creating something like a WordPress site. I've done that in the past, where if I wanted to really create a perception or a brand online, I could create a WordPress site, and that becomes my personal website. It all depends on to what level you want, but if you're looking for a really low investment to just try it out, try Google Profile. But for many, LinkedIn works as that online profile. Good question.
We have 2 minutes left, so I'll give you 2 questions and see if you can get
Okay.
them done. It is so,
Rapid
and
fire.
they may be outside the scope of this particular creative job search. So I'm going to just put that out there. One of the questions relates to for in the interview process, once you make it there and you need to talk to your employer about the need for flexibility because there's a health concern or a private matter, how would you disclose that? That could be something for a different job search, but I'll give it to
Yeah,
you anyway, Art.
I'll
And
give you
then
the short answer.
okay.
The short answer is if you can do the job as listed with some minor accommodations, like maybe a flexible start time or something like that, usually you wait for offer. At offer, you would ask for that. Now, of course, if you can only work half time and it's a full-time job, that's different. That's not a job that you probably are being honest that you could do the job as it's listed. But there's increasingly amounts of flexibility. It's tightened up a little bit, but there's more flexibility than there has in the past for things such as work from home or a flexible work schedule. But be able to overcome objections. If they say, hey, our job is open from 8 to 4:30, how are we going to be able to cover that time if you're not here? You're going to have a plan for that, potentially. But in many cases, if it's just a slight thing, your biggest negotiating window is between offer and acceptance, and be prepared for that. It's called negotiation. Ask for it then. Don't ask for it once you've started the job, because now you've accepted on the terms they had outlined, and now you're not doing the duties as assigned. So it's at offer before acceptance. And then one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
And then the question is for the attendees as well. Next week's creative job search dealing with resumes, will that touch on both resumes and cover letters? And will it talk a little bit about gaps in resumes and how to discuss that with prospective
Sure.
employers?
Real quick, gaps aren't the big deal they used to be. They used to be huge. You still have to tell an employer what you've been doing during that time, especially if it's a current gap. A lot of people have been laid off recently, and there's a lot of people re-entering the workforce. Be prepared to, and this ties right into skills. What have you been doing to enhance your skill sets or maintain your skill sets while you've been unemployed? That's much easier to overcome those objections to gaps in employment than it has been, but you still have to have a process. And yes, we will talk about that. As far as the other thing, I'm immediately forgetting what the first part of it was.
Will next week's creative job search on resumes
Cover letters.
touch on those?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then cover letters. Also, we do briefly touch on cover letters. I'm going to send everyone a link, just because someone mentioned it, to our online templates and information on cover letters. That's right within the creative job search process. Because again, cover letters could be an entire workshop in and of itself. We do touch on it briefly next week, but I'll give you some additional information to help you with that. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time in the very active chat box. Holy cow, a lot of comments I see going through there. A lot of great information being shared and questions being asked. Jason, thank you for your time. As I mentioned before, today's presentation, along with the recording and any of the links or follow-up material I promised you, is by the end of the day tomorrow. It won't be right after today's workshop, because it does take a while to download, edit it, upload it to YouTube, and send you a really nice professional package. And we want to do that. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. I wish you the best of luck in your job search. And please reach out to your local career force location if we can be of any assistance. Have a great day.